we're not doing even a fraction of what China did to control its epidemic.
What should we be doing, especially in New York City? And if you could speak directly to President Trump, what would you tell him?
I think if you look at what we should be doing, and it is that anybody who's been in contact with someone who is known to be infected should be put in mandatory quarantine in an isolated hotel room for up to 14 days from time of contact. That is how the Chinese stopped their epidemic. I've done an interview with an American who flew from Frankfurt to Shanghai. 2 days later, he was told to come downstairs with his wife, and for the next 11 days, they were in isolated, separate hotel rooms, not allowed to open the door. They were served with hazmat-clad workers every day for their food, and until they passed the 11 days with no symptoms. That's what we need to do. That is what we're not doing. Even the lockdown, the so-called lockdown, is not a lockdown.
Yes, Doctor, you saw what China did in Wuhan to actually bring the virus not to a complete halt, but to certainly slow it down dramatically. We're now hearing public health officials expressing concerns about the fact that China may be celebrating too early. We all may be reading too much into how those numbers have dipped so much that once people start going back to work, chances are good that virus is going to spread anyway. What are your thoughts about that?
That's definitely possible. It's possible for two reasons. One, new people can come into China. They're trying to control that, or to any place. And the second is the virus. We now have a major reservoir all over the world of this virus. It's likely to come back, whether it comes back quickly or comes back seasonally. We've got to be prepared. I'm also pleased to say, from my years of experience of working in developing drugs against viruses like these, that this is not a difficult problem for science to tackle. We will have drugs that stop this infection. We will have drugs that treat and cure those that are infected, and we will have drugs that prevent those who are exposed from being infected. We must use every tool at our disposal to make sure those drugs get developed quickly. The other thing I should say is I'm very worried about what I'm calling these false hopes, the chloroquines, the colchicine. We have no idea whether those work. We have a pretty good idea that if they work, they'll be minimally effective. We already know that. There are studies that show in some cases they have no effect. So I'm very worried about people who are touting these as cures and preventive measures, which may lead to behaviors which are dangerous, not only for the people who engage in those behaviors and take those so-called protective drugs, but the people around them as well. These are not effective in stopping infection and are minimally effective at best in treating infection.
Hey, Doctor, it's Jonathan Lemire. I wanted to ask you, the President's administration have obviously come under some criticism for not, perhaps, as you suggest, being strict enough in their measures to sort of isolate infected populations. And one thing they proposed this week was that anyone who's been in New York City don't have to necessarily have had contact with an infected person, but simply if you're a resident of New York City, that if you were to leave the city, you should self-quarantine for up to 14 days. Is that a wise decision?
It's a very wise decision, and in fact, that's one of the things that China did and does. If you're moving from one part of China to another, you are asked to stay in self-isolation for up to 14 days. If you come in from outside the country and you go to Beijing, you are what's called home quarantine, not even allowed to open the door to your apartment. You have to be in that apartment and have food delivered to you. So it's a very wise measure to control the spread of the infection. New York is a hotspot. We know that. And we don't know who's infected and who's not infected because we're not doing widespread testing. So it's presumptive that if you've been in New York, you are possibly infected and you should self-quarantine.
So for New York City being a hotspot, Doctor, you said that hotel rooms should be used for quarantines. That's one thing that I believe is not happening, and there are lots of hotels in New York City. What other measures that have worked in other countries that are finding a way to sort of flatten the curve? What other measures are they taking that are not being taken right now?
Well, what if you've been exposed to someone who's infected? You're required in China to take your temperature two times a day at least and report that on an app. Everybody in China today has an app on their phone which tells them their status and which allows them, if they've been exposed, to report their temperature status on a twice daily basis. That is an important control measure. And there are many measures like that that are needed to control this epidemic.
All right,
We're not over by any means, and we can't see the end of it yet. We will have, the good news is, there will be an end to this epidemic, whether it's a natural end and it goes away, or whether we develop the drugs that are antiviral drugs that we know we can develop. From my perspective, it's a tragedy that never needed to happen. Many of us were very clear in warning this will come back. We had, it is early as 2004, 2005, a whole set of chemical compounds that we knew would be very likely to treat not only the SARS virus, but all coronaviruses. We stopped the development of those drugs. My fervent hope is that we will not stop them now. Why did we stop? Because there was not an economic model that pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies can use. Well, that is a perfect time for the government to step in and provide the incentives necessary. We did that, develop drugs against bioterrorist weapons. I helped develop one of those drugs, so I know those mechanisms exist. We just didn't use them to protect ourselves. What I and all of the public health officials, or many public officials, said will be a next epidemic. Let's hope that we don't stop the development of these drugs prematurely, so we have them for the next and the next and the next wave of epidemics that are surely coming over the next 10 to 20 years.
Former Harvard Medical School professor and founder of the university's Cancer and HIV/AIDS research departments, Dr. William Haseltine, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you, Doctor, so much.
A lot of great information.
Great information. Also, so many warnings. Warnings, as he said, going back to 2004, 2005, funding gutted. You had Bill Gates saying this day was coming. You had scientists and doctors saying this day was coming. You had the administration was handed a pandemic war plan, which they completely disregarded and did nothing on that list. So all the way up to January, when the president was ignoring intel reports, February when he was ignoring intel reports, when he was refusing to take tests for coronavirus from the World Health Organization. Mika, this has been one mistake after another. It's killed a lot of people, and it's wrecking our economy.
And the app and quarantines by hotels are two measures we could be taking right now. We're going to go live to the White House for fresh reaction on the Senate vote on the stimulus plan coming up. Plus, more help is coming to New York